Today we're going to talk about democracy, and not just any old democracy, but American democracy, and how it's distinct from the traditional conception. What is democracy? Well, as many of you know, democracy is the idea of government by the people. Okay, it is a distinct form of government because the idea behind democracy is that political power flows from the people to the government. Okay, a big question in political science is, where does a ruler gain their authority? Where does the government gain its authority? In a monarch, for example, a monarchy, the king or queen or emperor or empress, whatever, derives their authority from God, the divine right of kings. In a democracy, power flows from the people to the government. The government only has that power which the people give it. We'll talk more about this idea of limited government and popular sovereignty and all that when we get to the Constitution. But I wanted to at least introduce to you the concept of democracy being a completely different system than what came before it. Government operates only by and with the consent of the governed. The people have to agree to what the government does. Now, how does it do that? Generally through its representatives and through the electoral process. Virtually every democracy, the indirect democracy is what we're primarily talking about, the people have the opportunity to elect their representatives. Periodic, regular elections. 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, however many years it might be, the period of elections. The idea is that if the people don't like who's representing their interest, they can get rid of them. Okay. Another concept of just virtually every democracy is the idea of majority rule. And we're going to talk more about that here in a second. Suffice to say that you need some means by which you can decide who's right and who's wrong in a question. Majority rule is the dominant form in virtually every democratic system. Now, how is American democracy distinct from every other form of democracy? Well, it's important to remember that America was founded as a political experiment. It is the founding fathers broke away from the most powerful country in the world, Great Britain, over political differences. They didn't like the way the British government was handling them as colonies. And the founders created this government based largely on these philosophical ideas that had been generated in the 17th century and the early 18th century, collectively referred to as the Enlightenment. Now, if you've taken world history, I'm sure you're familiar at least with that phrase, the European Enlightenment. America was greatly, profoundly influenced by John Locke, a Scottish philosopher, and then by other philosophers as well. Baron Montesquieu influenced the structure of the system, but John Locke, from a fundamental sense, really influenced the American experiment. And again, this is different than every other form of government in existence at the time, because virtually everything else was a monarchy, and the divine right of kings had power flowing from God to the king over the people. Okay, most Europeans didn't think the American system would last without a king. They just couldn't conceive of a governmental system without a king leading it. So what are some major principles of the American democratic experience? Well, majority rule certainly, but that's coupled with the idea of the protection of minority rights, political minority rights. Okay, the equality of all persons, and I'm sure you note the asterisk after the phrase, and we'll get to that in a couple minutes. And then finally, individual rights, freedoms, and then there's some other notions that I want to introduce to you as well, which we'll get to. So what about majority rule? Well, majority rule is simply the means of determining what the most people want. As you know, in our class, if there's a disagreement about something, we sumo thumb wrestle. Well, that's a means of determining what people want. In this case, the majority rule is the idea of determining what the most people want. The majority, 50% plus one more person, represents the quote, winning side in any debate. Now, of course, majority rule really works only in a bilateral question. If there's a yes or a no, that works. What if you have a multilateral question where you have lots of different answered groups, 3 or more? Well, then we are talking more likely than not in terms of a plurality. So, for example, if there's 3 possible results, one side gets 40% and the other 2 get 30%. The 40% group is considered the plurality. It's not a majority, but it's what the most people want. And so it would, quote, win the question. Now, consider whether or not majority rule is a good governing principle of a democracy. Is it a good idea? Well, I would argue yes, it is, for the most part. What I'd like you to do is take a couple minutes, pause the video, and consider, and then write down at least one example from American history where majority rule wasn't a good idea. The result of majority rule was a bad thing. Okay? Turn the video back on when you're ready. Now, I assume you've done that. Now, coupled with this idea of majority rule in the American system is the idea of protection of political minority rights. Is the majority always correct? I'm going to posit to you, no, it's not always correct. And so there needs to be an escape hatch, a pressure release to give voice to the minority, political minority interest. And we call that, the primary means in the American system is called the filibuster. We'll talk about the filibuster, how it fits into the legislative system when we get to that unit, but I want to introduce you to that idea now, okay, that there is a pressure release to give voice to the political minority's interest to make sure that their viewpoint is getting considered. Now, equality of all persons, the elephant in the room is the asterisk. What's with the asterisk? Well, look, equality of all persons does not mean we are all equal in ability or needs or anything else. And look, we're all different. Right? Most of you guys are taller than I am, for example. That doesn't mean that we're unequal in that sense. What equality of all persons in the governmental sense is referring really to 2 ideas. One, the equality before the law of all persons. And then secondly, the equality of opportunity available to all persons. Equality before the law is a pretty straightforward concept. It means that no group is going to be better off or being better treated than another group before the law. Certainly in a criminal sense or a civil sense, everybody's treated the same. Okay? Certainly we have room to discuss that. You know, is that really true in our system? And certainly that's a point of debate that we can get into tomorrow if you like. The idea of equality of opportunity is also the idea that we all should have, all persons should not be prevented from realizing their fullest potential for arbitrary reasons, for reasons of race, color, religion, gender, that those kind of arbitrary reasons shouldn't stand in the way of anybody realizing their fullest potential. Now, does that mean everybody can become president of the United States? No. But if your fullest potential is to become a car mechanic, nothing should stand in your way to becoming a car mechanic. Now, this is another thorny issue that I'll introduce some ideas and pose some questions to you tomorrow so that we can discuss this idea in more depth. But that's what equality of all persons means in the American democratic system, or in the experience. Okay, individual rights and freedoms are, of course, critical. The individual person is of great importance in the American democratic system. I mean, I'm sure you can think of stories where lots and lots of people put forth lots and lots of effort to rescue one person. If the value of individual life and the value of the individual wasn't so important in the American system, our society wouldn't go through such great lengths to help individuals. Now, with that said, the subordination of the individual to the group should be done only for important reasons. And this is a concept that we all are familiar with, even if we haven't really thought about it. For example, everybody pays taxes. Okay, well, you got to support the larger society. When America goes to war, sends soldiers overseas, there's a very, very small percentage of the American population defending us and our interests, okay? And that's subordinating their interest for the greater good of society. Public safety, stop signs. We stop at stop signs for the good of other people, and other people stop at stop signs for our good. And you can put into this idea all of law. Okay, the laws and regulation and rules of society are, in a sense, the subordination of the individual to the society. Now, again, I hasten to add, look, freedom is not an absolute, okay? Because the absolute freedom is anarchy. Okay, it's the absence of government, of rules and regulations, and quite frankly, very few people want that, want true anarchy, because that means that the strong will rule the weak ultimately. I mean, that's what anarchy leads to. Individuals in the American system, individuals are free to do what they want as long as it doesn't infringe on the freedoms of somebody else to do what they want. I think of it as a bathtub full of bubble bath, and how all the bubbles are resting against each other. Think of your rights as a bubble, and then your rights end where somebody else's bubble begins. Okay? Society needs rules and laws. Why? I'd like you to come up with a couple of reasons. Why does society need rules and laws? Well, I'll solicit from some of you tomorrow your answers to that question, okay? One of the overarching questions in this class is going to be how to balance the competing interests of liberty, of freedom, of the individual, and security, the idea of safety, authority. How do we balance these two in American society? And that's going to be a question we're going to wrestle with all semester. In fact, chances are you're going to wrestle with it all your life. Okay. Now, I want to get to a couple more ideas, important notions of American democracy. The idea of compromise, political compromise. Look, in any system that puts the individual first and says that we're all equal, well, how does a democratic government make decisions? Well, to make decisions, you have to agree. You have to compromise. You have to give up some of your interests. The other side gives up some of their interests, and you meet somewhere in the middle. Is everybody happy? No, but chances are you get a much better result because the most people are happy. Okay, it's a little utilitarian idea. Also, part and parcel with the American democratic system is the free enterprise economic system. Free enterprise is synonymous with America. Okay, the free enterprise system is, some people call it capitalism. I prefer free enterprise. It's the idea of maximizing the reward for individual achievement, for individual effort, profit motive. It's what our system's founded on. Think of it this way. On 9/11, September 11, 2001, the jihadists who attacked America targeted the symbols of American authority. They targeted the Pentagon, symbol of military authority of America. They targeted the World Trade Centers, symbol of economic free enterprise system. And they targeted the political center, the White House or the Congress, but that airplane was crashed by the American citizens on board into that field in Pennsylvania. So again, we'll talk more about these in class. Be sure to fill out the Google Doc form, and I'll see you tomorrow.